Good afternoon to everyone. Happy Saturday. It's good to see you all. Hello, thank you for the waves. My name is Sofia Cervantes, and I'm with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. Thank you to Sandra for organizing this and for inviting us to come and give some information. So the State Council, in case you're not as familiar with us, we are a state advocacy agency. We are instituted in federal law, and so in the law, it gives our agency the role of providing advocacy support to individuals with developmental disabilities, to support their families, and to support and advocate within the systems that provide support to individuals with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. And so on an individual level, what we do is we provide what we call technical support, which is answering your questions. If you have any question in the future, you can feel free to give us a call. I've actually put my information already on the chat. So if you'd like to grab it from there, please feel free. So we can answer your questions. We also provide trainings, a range of topics. Today we'll be speaking on alternatives to conservatorship and supported decision-making. However, we provide trainings on a range of topics. Sandra was mentioning we've done aging before. We focus a lot on strategies for IPP meetings, IEP meetings, etc. So in the chat, I will drop a flyer. We actually provide trainings every Monday at 10 a.m. And so if you'd like to join us, you can look at the topic of the day. You can look at what language we're providing it in. Usually one Monday we'll provide a topic in English, and then the next we'll provide it in Spanish. And so I'll drop in the chat right now the flyers for that. Okay, and I'll share with you our March series, although March is almost over, and our April series. Just so you know, throughout the year, every Monday, the login information remains the same. Okay, so you can keep that login information and use it every Monday, 10 o'clock throughout the year. And you can join us and see if it's the language of your preference and or a topic that you're interested in. Okay, so feel free to take that. So we will today be discussing alternatives to conservatorship, supported decision-making, and especially as it relates to changes that have now come with the new law, with AB 1663 passing, which expanded this conversation about conservatorship. We'll take some focus on that. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to write them on the chat. I will focus a little bit on giving information, and then we can go ahead and move into more of a question and answer. But I know how it is. We sometimes have a question, and if we don't ask it, we forget. So please feel free to put it on the chat, and we will discuss. I want to direct you to the chat one last time here. I've placed a link on the chat. And the link is to a Google Drive. So it'll give you access to the materials I'll be sharing today and beyond. It has a little bit more related materials in there. So please do feel free to grab that link. Well beyond today, that link will work. If I add anything else as a product of our conversation, and I'll say, oh, I'll drop that in the Google Drive, that's what I mean. Any material that you might request during this conversation, I can easily drop it in there. And by you clicking that link, whenever you click it, you'll have access to all the documents that are in there. I've placed a small star next to the two documents that we'll sort of focus on. And I will place a star as well, actually, as I show you. And I am displaying on my screen, is that right? You guys can see the Google Drive? Perfect. So if you see here, you'll be able to click on this and you'll be able to see, actually, if you're interested in reading the bill, the Assembly Bill 1663, you'll be able to look at that and look at some changes, only if you like that kind of reading, right? Reading the law and official things like this can be a little bit tedious, but if you'd like to, it's there. I have some samples of some supported decision making agreements. We'll discuss this in a bit, but just so you know, you have several things in this document or in this Google Drive, and you'll be able to access it, okay? And Sandra, if you'd like, when you guys post the YouTube, please feel free to put a note or a comment where people can grab the link. It's available for everyone, okay?
Great. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be using actually primarily a document from Disability Rights California, okay? And everyone can now see my screen, limited conservatorship, perfect. So I want to direct you to Disability Rights California. They have amazing publications. I'm really grateful for all the sections they have. If you go to Disability Rights California, you'll see a tab at the top and it says resources. And then when you scroll, you see different tabs or folders. And one of them says conservatorship. Under there, you'll find this publication. But remember, you also have it on your Google Drive. I've placed that in there for you. And if anyone is just adding on to the call, please feel free to refer to the chat. And I've placed a link there where you can access today's materials. So this Disability Rights California publication titled Limited Conservatorships and Alternatives, it is a 12-page document. It is updated based on the recent changes due to AB 1663. So it is a wonderful document. Please feel free later on in your own time to review this. And for a second, we will review this, but for a second, let me pause and have more of a just intro and conversation. So with this topic of limited conservatorship, one, I'd like to acknowledge there are individuals who are currently in conservatorship. There are individuals who are in the process of learning how to make decisions. And so one, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that there is a spectrum among our community in terms of making decisions, right? And so I kind of see it, if you all remember, if your child was in a special education in their younger years. I don't know why I'm assuming that a lot of them are adults. When I speak to Sandra, I hear a lot of adults, and probably because her son is an adult. But in special education, there's this concept based on the law of the least restrictive environment, right? And where we talk about the least restrictive environment is based on the law and is important, right? And the least restrictive meaning whatever looks mostly like the scenario for a person without a disability. That seems to be considered what the least restrictive environment is. So in special education, right, least restrictive environment would be in a mainstream classroom with typical peers, right, with supports as needed. And that's what we kind of want to push for, right, the least restrictive. However, then we say, you know what, based on this person's needs, it's more appropriate for them to be in another setting, even if it's more restrictive, right? And so we move along the restrictive spectrum accordingly based on people's needs. And so I like to bring that to the concept of conservatorship, because if we look at conservatorship, it is also a matter of least restrictive. Right. And so we always want to go for the least restrictive, but then move along the spectrum to more restrictive based on individual needs. And so one of the most important things, in my opinion, that's happened with this AB 1663, the changes to conservatorship, is that now brings a wider awareness to the need for least restrictive when it comes to conservatorship. And as I move on to share about this, let me share, I always like to share, I'm not a parent, and I have a 7-year-old niece, and she's beautiful and I love her, but I know that I don't know, if you know what I mean, right? I know that I don't know what it is to be a parent, to have supported someone all throughout their life And then when they turn 18, to be told, yeah, you can be dismissed now, right? You have no say, you have no right over this person's life. So I don't know how hard that process is, right? As an advocate, my role and our role at state council or as advocates of individuals is to conserve and think of this concept of what's the least restrictive for the parent, for the individual. Now, sometimes conservatorship, and I say this sensitively and respectfully, sometimes conservatorship is sometimes about the parent's comfort, right? I'm going to feel more comfortable if I can make decisions for them and they just kind of follow what I'm saying, right? And now, just to share a little bit, so you know the basis of the conversation. Prior to being an advocate, and I've been with the state council for 5 years, but prior to that, I was a provider and served individuals with disabilities, specifically individuals with autism and a mental health diagnosis. So autism with bipolar or depression or schizophrenia, some sort of psychosis. And I had most of the individuals I worked with were nonverbal and utilized a alternative method of communication. And so my experience comes from the privilege that I had to really sit in people's living rooms, right? And watch the dynamics unfold. And so one of the things that I learned and I remember from those interactions is at 18, it was kind of panic mode for the parent. And I can, even though I'm not a parent, I can understand that, right? And say, well, what can I do to protect my son or daughter? And that is still the case. Remember, we're talking about least restrictive and considering how can we begin at the least restrictive in terms of conservatorship and move along the spectrum of restrictiveness as needed based on the individual's need, right? So when we talk about conservatorship, again, we acknowledge for some individuals that is necessary and appropriate, and they may wish it for themselves. Again, as advocates, we want to advocate for the individual and to advocate for this least restrictive concept. And so in conservatorship, just like in special education, mainstream is the least restrictive with supports as needed, then in adulthood and in the topic of conservatorship, that translates into a non-conserved adult is the least restrictive, right? Again, leaving options open for as needed, right? Based on the person's need. So what the change in law has done is it now requires that we first explore this first least restrictive option before we consider, is a conservatorship truly needed? And as we refer to the Disability Rights California document, I want to point out there are different types of conservatorship for individuals with disabilities that it will usually be referred to as limited conservatorship. And that is because a judge can decide how many powers they will release to another person and what powers the individual with the disability can retain. Okay, so what is a conservatorship? A conservatorship is a court process where a judge decides to give power over someone else's decision-making to another person, right? And right now I'm gonna sort of go back and forth with what has been and sort of what has changed with AB 1663. And so one thing to note though is currently the person should have the choice to choose who conserves them, if that is going to be the course of action, right? So they should be the ones choosing. In fact, if a person says, I want to conserve this adult, but the adult has a different person that they prefer, then the court would first consider that option. Okay, and so that's important to know. So there are different conservatorships, and you can see them listed here. But again, the limited conservatorship is the one that we refer to when speaking about individuals with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. Okay, so who can be appointed as a limited conservator? Excuse me, a limited conservator must be 18 years and over, and the person, this publication is written to the person, the people with the disability, the person with the disability is the audience. So when it says you can just suggest someone you know, such as a family member or friend, that is referring to the person with the disability can choose a person to conserve them. Okay, so a limited conservatorship is established by making a petition to the court, right? By making a petition to the court, and then the court goes through a process, including assigning a representative to the individual to make sure that indeed the person who wants to conserve them is looking out for their best interest, right? And I explained this concept to parents because it can, imagining what it feels like as a parent, I can imagine that feels a little intrusive, right? What do you mean you're giving my son or daughter a lawyer or a representative to defend them from me, right? I've loved them their whole life. But the concept here is, the truth is the parent is not always the one who requests to be the conservator. And so the legal system is looking out for the person by sort of doing a checks and balances and assigning them someone to, one, support them to understand the process, two, to ask them if they had someone else in mind to conserve them, and three, to explore this area of capacity, right? To explore whether they are a person who may require conservatorship, or if it is a person who just requires support to make decisions. And we'll get into this concept, which I actually want to focus on, of supported decision making, right? So when we speak about a limited conservatorship, we are speaking about 7 areas in particular. And let me scroll down here to direct you to these 7 areas. So these 7 areas for a conservatorship, the 7 areas that the judge will look at is residence, so choices about where the person would live, have access to confidential records, to get married, to enter into contracts, to give consent for medical treatments, to control social and sexual contacts, and to make educational decisions. It's 7 things and I had 8 fingers up. Let's put one down, right? So it's 7 areas of life that are being considered, and the judge, with the support of a representative who's in close contact with the individual, is looking at, is the person able to make decisions? And let's evaluate each of these areas of life. And so the result may be that a judge grants maybe only 3 of these 7 powers, or 2 of these 7 powers, or all 7. If the person is conserved, and it's important for the parent to make sure they know what powers they have actually been given, right? And just a brief example, I again worked for a provider in the past, and we had an individual who had a disability and who was employed by us. And I remember their parent coming in and wanting to know how they were performing on the job, right? And so it was awkward conversation, right? But I had to say, I actually can't disclose that, right? And she said, well, I'm the conservator. And I said, let me look at your conservatorship papers. And indeed, I believe, if my memory doesn't fail me, I believe they only had a decision-making power for educational decisions. And so I had to explain to her, I said, you are the conservator, but the judge determined that your son can make decisions in all areas except the educational one. They've given you some power over that, but that's it, right? That's it. So it's important to, if a person does enter conservatorship to really know what power was given, right? So I'm going to scroll down now, though, and have more of a conversation of now, based on the new, based on the revisions to the law, now the court says before you even look at if someone should be conserved or not, let's first explore, and here's this term of least restrictive alternatives, right? And by least restrictive alternatives, the first identified here is supported decision-making, and we'll talk about that, followed by other alternatives which have always been available, durable power of attorney, or other general alternatives, right? So financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney. So it's actually quite important to, I would say, right, as a parent to say, well, what areas are the most concerning for me as my son or daughter turns into an adult? And I actually want to refer you to this other document. And this is from Disability Voices United, and it's called With Support and Without the Court. It even has a little rhyme to it, huh? But I really appreciated this graphic here. Give me 1 second as I locate it. I really appreciated this graphic that I'm hoping to find. Okay, here we go. So here it says, I like the way it breaks it down in terms of, and again, going back to my limited experience, but with families where sometimes the parent was just concerned about their SSI money. And so they thought that they had to go get a full conservatorship, or a limited conservatorship, I should say, but meaning they had to go get the 7 powers, but really their concern was just education or just medical. So this is a great thing. So thinking about what's my greatest concern, what do I want to do for my son or daughter? I want to support my child at school. If that's the greatest concern, you might be looking at a supported decision-making agreement, which we'll get into in just a little bit, and an educational disclosure, meaning the schools usually have a release of information that the student can sign, so your son or daughter can sign, to give you consent to continue being involved in their meetings, in their documents, etc. And so this is kind of a nice assessment tool for you to ask yourself. Let's say my concern is when my son or daughter goes to the doctor or hospital, right? So if that's your concern, maybe you're looking, before we look at conservatorship, knowing that conservatorship in this sense is the most restrictive, what are least restrictive options? An agreement like the one we discussed, a durable healthcare power of attorney, a HIPAA authorization, again, where the person in this setting, they would be called the patient signs a document giving you consent or giving them consent to speak to you and involve you, right? Again, noticing here that the reason why this is most or least restrictive is because the authority is in the person's hand, right? I'm signing something giving this person consent to help me, versus I am taking away my right to make a decision and this power is given to someone else, right? And we won't get into this topic, but in the larger scheme of things, that does something for a person, right? To know that they have control over their life or to know that they don't. Yesterday, I actually presented for a parent support group, and it was a Spanish-speaking group, and we talked about the need for control in our own lives, right? We actually, we won't go into it, but we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with it, right? Where it says survival needs and physiological needs are first. And then there's this need for feeling part of something bigger, feeling connected, feeling self-actualized and self-realized. When we take away individuals' rights, sometimes we begin to chip at the possibility of them really having all of their needs met, right? If you've ever been ill or recovering from surgery, how does it feel to have to depend on someone during that recovery, right? It's very uncomfortable. And if I may share, in my years of supporting individuals, which again, I often worked with individuals with high needs, and usually what that means is a lot of potential for aggression, low communication. What I would almost see, I could even draw a line, is the less control that they had, I think, was really correlated to the amount of aggression that we saw, sometimes towards self, sometimes against others or toward others, right? And so we see that this topic of conservatorship and this change in the law really is beyond, right? If we look at the person, we're saying, let's explore other ways to give them control, right? Let's explore ways of breaking off the stigma, right? That individuals with disabilities need someone to always do things for them. That is sort of a pattern that I think as society we're trying to break, right? Every week our office meets with self-advocates, with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this week we were having a conversation, and it was heartbreaking and also just very, I was intrigued. And most of they were talking about their complaints just with society, right? And how they get treated. And one of their complaints was, I hate that when I'm with someone, the person refers to them to ask questions about me as if I wasn't there, right? Like, hello. One person sarcastically, right, might say, I'm in a wheelchair. I have difficulty with my legs, not my voice, not my mind, right? And so, but as a society, we're breaking off from that, and we're trying to, in this change in law, I'm hopeful, right, that sends us in that direction of really thinking a person, be it whatever disability they may have, right, may not need a conservator. They may just need support like anyone else to make decisions, right? And this is including people that are fully verbal and people that have limited communication. And I like to share my experience. I love that my experience was with individuals who had limited communication or nonverbal, because I got to see firsthand how physically they may look as if they're not even understanding or picking up what you're saying, when in reality, I think they understood it deeply, and more deep than you and I, right? And so I respectfully say, sometimes we see them doing certain movements or mannerisms, and we say, oh, they're off in their own world, right? They are tracking everything that is said, and they understand completely. And so with this change to conservatorship, it's really saying, regardless of display of disability, whether it's visible or not, let's ask, what's the least restrictive, right? And so again, this chart can help you determine that for yourself and with your son or daughter. If you want to help them just with their money, right, then we would look at an agreement or a durable power of attorney. If the concern is SSI payment, we look at representative payee form, right? If their concern is financial, etc. You can see this and see there are other alternatives to conservatorship. And to again emphasize, now the law requires that we explore these alternatives, which is a win for individuals with disabilities and everyone really. And so supported decision-making is now a concept that is in the law in terms of conservatorship. And all that supported decision-making means is when you use trusted friends, family, and professionals to help you understand situations and choices in your life. This is the least restrictive, right? Just like we said, again, in special education, it's mainstream classroom with support. This is saying the same thing. No restriction, and just add the support. And our goal is always for an individual with a developmental or any kind of disability to live their lives as closely as possible to someone without a disability, right? That is the goal. And so what we realize is everyone does supported decision-making. An individual without a disability, this is the way we live our life. Yes or no, right? I know I'm I love my car, but I know nothing about it, right? Like if it's making a noise or like a light comes on, or I am told you need a new transmission, I write that down and say, absolutely, thank you so much for that information. And I pick up the phone and I call my dad, right? Or I would involve a friend. When I bought a car, I spoke to my stereotypical, but I spoke to my male friends, right? And I said, hey, is this a good car? Is this a good price? I know nothing, guide me, right? So this gives us the freedom to say, I don't always know everything about the decisions I'm going to make. And what do I do when I don't? I engage my friendships. I engage my family members. I engage professionals. I will call a mechanic and say, hey, can you come check out this car that I'm about to purchase from someone, it's a used car. This is the way we all live our lives. And so now this concept is a little more formalized into this process of thinking of a conservatorship in terms of saying a person with a disability may not need a conservatorship. And indeed, the least restrictive way of doing this is to leave them be without a conservatorship and just add on some support. Okay. And so I will look at the chat in just a second, although I think Sandra's helping me with some of those questions for logistics. But so when we look at supported decision-making, I want to be able to get to this part of with supported decision-making, you can choose to practice supported decision-making formally or informally, okay? And so what that means is you can just engage people in your life and ask them to help you. Or if you are a person who you say, because of how I display my disability or how my disability is displayed, I may need a document that helps me tell a person, hey, this person, I am giving them my consent and it is notarized. Someone has seen me sign this because I want them to help me, right? So based on, the law gives this concept of supported decision-making and then gives you the choice of, you can practice it informally the way we all do, or you can decide to have something in writing that says the following things. So if you are wanting to do a written agreement, then the supported decision-making, you'll see SDM, supported decision-making agreement, must be one in plain language. So that means very simple language, not like a release of information. Release of informations usually have pretty complicated language, right? The signed party hereby declares, right? None of that, right? Plain language. So I give permission to, or whatever that may be. So in plain language, signed by the person and the supporters in front of a witness. Okay. So actually, it doesn't necessarily say a notary, but you may want to go that extra step, or just in front of a witness who witnessed that you weren't forced or coerced into signing this. Okay. And it must be reviewed at least every 2 years, okay? Which makes sense. Relationships change over time. You may want to even do it every year. Relationships change every time. You might take a document and it's 10 years old and they're going to say, well, we're not sure about that, okay? The agreement should include what you want support with. So what the individual wants support with, what the supporter agrees to help you with. So this is sort of a twofold agreement, what they are requesting and what you are agreeing to as the supporter. Your supporter's agreement to their responsibilities and supporters. Information about your right to report abuse. That's very important there. Any other relevant documents about decision-making. So there's actually, before I go to this, we're going to look at a template right now of a SDM agreement, a supported decision-making agreement. But before we do that, know that these other options that we are a little more familiar with still stand, right? So the durable power of attorney, other general alternatives, alternatives for services in your IEP or IPP, so signing releases of information, financial power of attorney, etc. So supported decision-making is one of the alternatives, right? And or you can choose the other alternatives, which include power of attorney, medical, financial, oh, it's skipping my mind, a medical, I missed what that's called.
Directives?
Yes,
Or
thank you very much. I was just gonna go see it. There you go. So you can decide what is the appropriate thing. Okay. So now let me take you quickly. And just so you know, in your Google Drive, you'll see a document that looks like this. It says related links. I just put several links here, like the ones that we've looked at. Okay. So let's look at. Actually, let me show you this template here. There's something for medical appointments. That's something you might want to look at. This isn't the STM agreement, but you may want to look at. It's called My Health Passport. This allows the person, it's in plain language, to answer questions about themselves, to have this handy like a passport so that doctors, medical professionals can have an idea, can kind of get a profile, quick profile on the person. Okay, so all this is part, or it could be part of supported decision making, right? Especially for a person who's nonverbal, they may take a little more time to express this to someone. Instead of them expressing it every time, then perfect. Let's get this in a document that we give to anyone who will need it. Okay, but so let's go here to this handbook that we were looking at. And if we scroll all the way down, there's an example of a supported decision-making agreement. Okay, so what's important to note here is the law just gives these things that it should include. So you're going to find a range of templates. As long as it has those things, it could really be formatted or written in different kind of language, as long as it's still plain language, right? But this is an example. So this is an example supported decision-making agreement, and this is from Disability Voices United. And this one adds this and says this agreement must be read out loud or otherwise communicated to all parties to the agreement in the presence of either a notary or two witnesses, right? This is something that they've added here. So here, my name, and again, this is filled out by the person. I want to have people I trust help me make decisions. That's plain language. The people who will help me are called supporters. You would be called a supporter if you were in this role. I know that I can rely on my supporters to offer information and discuss options and choices with me, which again, this is what we all do. I make decisions about my life with support, like everyone else, the least restrictive. This agreement can be changed at any time. I can change it by crossing out words and writing my initials next to the changes, or I can change it by writing new information or another piece of paper, signing that paper and attaching it to this agreement. So it's language. You might like this part. You might say, I don't think we need this part in our agreement. Up to you. Okay. And remember what we read, the requirements, it's got to have the supporter's name, right? So if there's more than one, you can place it here. For this template, monitor, they refer to someone for support in finances. So I'll skip this over for now. The supporters can talk to each other about me, and the person gets to check off only when I say it's okay or whenever they want. Some people may want to add only verbally or exchanging documents, right? You get to decide that. When people sign releases, actually a little tip, I guess, whenever you sign a release of information, there's usually those options, right? Verbal information or written. So for this, the person may want to specify that, okay? The person may also want to specify in regards to what, right? What can you exchange? Whenever I had, when I was a therapist, whenever someone would write a release of information, for me. They got to check off, can I just communicate about daily behaviors, about their mental health diagnosis, about their prescriptions, about other areas in their life, right? They get to choose what they want, okay? Meeting with my support team, okay? I want my entire support team to meet, or I don't want my support team to meet on a regular basis. All this is in the form of checkboxes, giving the person control, right? And having it formally in a document so that everyone knows. Printed name, address, phone number, email of the supporter, etc. More information on the supporter. And then as the supporter, you in this case, you would put here, I want this person to help me with these choices. You would commit to these, making choices about food, making choices about clothing, taking care of personal hygiene, remembering to take medicine, making safe choices around the house, understanding and getting help if I'm being treated badly, abused, making choices about alcohol and drugs, making choices about where I live and who I live with, where I work, what to do in my free time, right? So this is very specific. You can go less specific, you can go more specific. But do remember, it must include whatever the person is wanting help with and what the supporter is committing to help with, okay? So I leave you with this again as a resource. Here below, as you continue to scroll down, there are other, here is a signature for a notary or witness. And here, if you'd like to explore more so the power of attorney for medical choices, this is a template that is also in plain language. That's an example of a power of attorney. Okay, so as you continue to scroll, you see other examples. Okay, I'd like to leave some time for questions, so I think I will stop this part in just a bit. Just want to let you know you have in your Google Drive, and I'll put the link again, this link to the Disability Rights California link for the document that we reviewed, which was this one, and it's got more information here. You've also got the link to the handbook that I just showed you. You've got the link to the health passport, and you've got the link to 2 other templates or samples for the supported decision-making agreement. You also have here at the end a supported decision-making resource. If you click on this link, it takes you to, I believe it's like a 2-hour presentation, and it is, it's great. I started listening to it, I haven't quite finished it, but it's with individuals with disabilities, and it's it includes a judge and lawyer, and they discuss this topic about supported decision-making. So it's a SDM forum with support and without the court. It's sort of a training or conversation that was done based on the topic of the booklet that they have. So it's a very good resource to watch, and or you can watch this resource again too when Sandra places it on YouTube. Okay, so I will pause the screen now. I will again put the link on the chat. You can look at this link, and again, just to give you a quick preview, this is what the link will take you to, and with a little star, you'll see the documents that we reviewed, and you click them, and you can have access to them, okay? Again, remember, if you can copy and paste this link somewhere, anytime that you access it, this information will remain there. In a month, in 2 months, in a year, it'll stay there. It's in a Google Drive, okay? So if ever I add anything else to the Google Drive, you can also access it. Know that I will place the flyers for our office's Monday 10 a.m. trainings in case you're interested. So you could go to your Google Drive and you'll be able to find the documents there, okay? So now I will give some time for questions, and if you so kindly would, I'm going to place another link. We're in the era of links, huh? Another link, if you wouldn't mind, as we wrap up this presentation, if you wouldn't mind clicking on that link, and it will take you to a semi-brief survey. This really helps us to gather information and see if this is beneficial to be able to continue doing this. So it'll take you to a Google form, which is a survey, and you'll be able to answer yes, no, as you wish. And then at the bottom, you just press submit. Okay. And if by any chance you don't get to finish it before we end, you can just press on the link and, fill it out this afternoon or this evening. But thank you beforehand for filling that out. All right, Sandra, I'll defer to you and or, take some questions. I'll scan the chat quickly and see if there's any questions that I missed. Oh,
I don't see any questions in the chat, I don't think.
Okay, I see one actually here was sent privately. Do we need a conservatorship if we have a special needs trust? No, it is my understanding that no. A special needs trust fund is a way to support someone to secure their finances, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they need control or take it away, or that they even need help with that. So in general, no, the question would be no. You don't need a conservatorship, you have a special needs trust fund. Yes, Gretchen?
Gretchen.
Hi.
Hi.
I just had a quick question. We just did power of attorney documents with our son Cooper, who just turned 18, for medical and financial. And I guess what I'm trying to understand about the financial one is, what does that legally mean? Like, does that mean he has to have an agreement with us? We have to be involved? It's like, here's the example, right? Is that he happens to wander around and is like, ooh, I want to go to the store and, I'm going to sign a contract for the, this fancy new car.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of issues, including that he doesn't drive. But
yeah.
But I just wonder, what does that power of attorney really give us in terms of support?
Yeah. Mainly my understanding is mainly the power of attorney. It gives you a formal right to be involved in that process. It doesn't necessarily cancel their right. So, right. For example, if he were to go and purchase a car, right? I worked with a gentleman and he actually signed a contract for a lifetime membership to a gym. The parent just was like, what's happening, right? So in that example, actually, they did take it to the court. They explained that he gets SSI, doesn't have enough money for it. It turned into a thing. But so the parent wasn't able to come in and say, oh, that doesn't count.
Right.
Only if the person was conserved, in my understanding, would that happen? Would they then break the contract because if the judge gave them the contracts right, then that means a person's signature doesn't hold power. So only in that scenario would that contract be easily void.
Right.
But with power of attorney, my understanding is it's just a more formal document that the person has signed saying, oh, this person has the right to represent me, not necessarily to override me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I missed. Yeah. And this is where, it's I could imagine that's tough. So it really, even as a conservator, though, it doesn't take away our responsibility as parents, as professionals, to really work on their decision-making skills. And this is sort of a echoing message in all the presentations I give. When they're young, giving them that decision-making power, making them used to making decisions. If at a very young age, they never even chose their clothes or their hairstyle or what to eat, then how do we expect them at 18 to say, I don't want to get married. I do want a job. I do want to live out of state. They don't have that muscle of even having gotten the message of saying, oh, I can make decisions. They've been sent a message their whole life of other people will take care of it. Right. And
and he's not that. He's going out of state for college in a couple of years, but But, I could see him not really understanding like numbers. He's terrible at numbers. Bless his sweet soul. Like our biggest thing we've been telling him, when he goes out to lunch with friends at school is like, if you don't, it's fine to be terrible at math. It's not fine to pretend you're good at math. You need to be asking for help, right? If you're with a friend, your job is to be asking that friend, do I have enough money for this? Is that a reasonable purchase?
Yeah. And really the best thing we can do, and it's within the concept of supported decision making, is really engaging them to have a close relationship with you, to want to consult about these things. And for them to take responsibility and remember, I'm not going to sign anything. I'm not going to make a big decision without consulting with my supporters, right? That's a decision they have to almost intrinsically develop. If not, this kind of, right? It kind of goes downhill. There's parents who have signed, or there's students who have signed, I want my parent to be at my IEP meeting. Right. But then when the school tells them, hey, we want to have an IEP meeting with you right now in an hour, if they say yes, that's that. Right. So it's really these signed papers along with the capacity to say, I can't make this choice without some support. So I'm not going to continue this conversation, or no, I'm not going to sign this until I speak with we all have that choice. It's just also helping them build that capacity to stop and ask and consult, just like any of us. So it's not even a twofold, it's a manyfold process. So what if they are not very verbal? Thank you for asking that. So one suggestion would be, first, it's important for them to have a method of communication, including if that method is nonverbal, meaning a choice board, right? And just because I have it handy, I'll quickly display it on the screen because I used it yesterday. And pardon me, this will actually be in Spanish, but you'll get the point. The choice board is in Spanish, but so it's to really give them some communication tools. Give me 1 second. Right, where they're able to say yes, no, right? And note that, let me display this, and pardon me as I shift quickly. This says yes, no, maybe. You're learning some Spanish today. A lo mejor means maybe. I don't know. I need more time to think. I need help. I don't understand your question. Something else, and I need more information, right? So if someone is nonverbal, developing communication tools and resources for them to still be able to communicate their preferences. Things like scales, I love using a 1 through 5 scale. When I worked with individuals, I really enjoyed, when they were young, we would use this scale and go to Yogurtland. And I wanted to know what their preference of flavor was, right? Very fun part of my job, right? Let's have ice cream. So I would say the mango flavor on a 1 through 5, how much did you like it? Even if they're nonverbal and they would go and not eat it, I would say, it looks like you liked it at a 1, you didn't, right? Versus the chocolate that they almost ate the whole cup, right? It looks like you liked it at a 5. When at 5 years old, they learn how to use this scale. When they're older, I had the privilege of working with them for many years. So then we use this scale to hire staff and say, hey, we interviewed John. How much did you like John? A 1. This has now become a reliable tool for communication because he's been using it for years. So this is kind of a whole other presentation, which maybe we can discuss later, but it's about not just developing communication tools, but making them reliable, starting with non-critical topics that and then using those tools to move them along to more difficult topics, right? And so if you're familiar with communication, they call it like a ladder of communication. You start with yes, no, and then you get a little bit more difficult in your questions. So really developing a communication tool so that even as you're signing documents that are formal, you know for sure that this person knows what they're choosing. Okay. All right. Well, I know that we've reached our time, and I want to be respectful, especially on a Saturday. I forgot it's a Saturday. I'm at my desk, so I thought it was Friday. So
Sophia,
thank you.
Can you answer what somebody said, how long would it take to prepare it? SDM and SDM, I guess.
How long would it take to prepare an SDM? Up to you. You saw the template. I mean, I would say it could be something that it depends maybe I would say the processing and the communication level of the individual. Let me backtrack. Right. For you and I, that process in a typical manner and communicate in a typical manner, we might be able to fill this out very quickly. But you really want to make sure that the person's understanding each section. So it's hard to give a time frame, but you know, what's good, it's in plain language. So I'd say a couple hours, right? A couple hours, give or take, so that the person really understands what is being said. Okay. All right. I'm hearing myself. That's for an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you
Yes.
for everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and really appreciate Sophia's time to spend her morning with us here at DSLA.
pleasure.
So
My pleasure. Quickly, someone asked about cost. There is no cost involved spoken about. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you again,
next time
Sandra.
we're gonna
Take
do
care.
this in Spanish.
Yeah, sure,
And you guys
definitely.
must join. So
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much,
You take
Sophia.
care.
Have
Happy
a great
Saturday,
weekend,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.